All right, let me welcome everyone to the Rabbi's Talmud class. This is the first one of 2024. And as usual, the class is sponsored by Ellen and George Sheeran, Nora and Jack Skiba, in memory of Libby and Harold Grill, and by the David Susser Trust. And can everyone please mute themselves until the rabbi is open to questions? Am I correct, Rabbi? That's what you would prefer?
Sounds good to me. Thank you very much, Keith, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. And we will talk a little bit tonight about Zionism and how the events of October the 7th impacted the Zionism and the relationship between diaspora and Israel. And it will be, as always, an open conversation, and that will be enriched by several sources that I prepared for our meeting. And I went right away, jump into an article from the New York Times about our subject here. We will start reading an excerpt of this article from this article, and then we will start talking before we visit other different sources. Let me share my screen with you. Welcome again, everyone. So the name of the article was, "Is Israel part of what it means to be Jewish?" as a question. And I would like to invite one of you maybe to start reading for us from the article from last month. Who would like to start us off tonight?
I'll read if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Dora.
Okay. Last month, on the first night of Hanukkah, more than 200 people packed an old ballroom on the third floor of a restored synagogue in Brooklyn. A few came fresh off the subway from a protest in Manhattan that was organized by left-wing Jewish groups calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Shall I go on?
Yes, please.
Okay. They were there to hear from Shaul Magid, 65, whose long, thin white beard and shaved head made him look more like a roadie than a rabbi. A professor of Jewish studies at Dartmouth as well. Yes, a rabbi. Mr. Magid was there to spread the message elucidated in a new book, The Necessity of Exile, that Jews today outside Israel, 75% of whom live in the United States, should embrace diaspora, the state of living outside a homeland, as a permanent and valuable condition. If there's a diasporic reality where Jews have been able to live as Jews, flourish as Jews, not to be oppressed and persecuted, whether they choose to be a Satmar Hasid or Larry David, it doesn't matter. They're allowed to live the Judaism they want. Why would that be a tragedy, he said. Mr. Magid's outlook is one of several burgeoning visions for the future of Jewish life that fall on the umbrella of diasporism. The idea has been getting a new look since Hamas's horrific attack on Israel 3 months ago, and Israel's pulverizing bombing campaign and invasion in Gaza. Those events have forced Jews everywhere to reckon anew with what they think about Israel and the central role it plays in Jewish life. The kind of charged moment when members of spiritual communities can ask themselves what really matters and sometimes reach radically different conclusions.
Thank you very much, Dora. Thank you so much.
Well,
So I will stop sharing for a moment because I want to see you all and say the following. So the idea of exile accompanied us since the very beginning. Adam and Eve were expelled from the Gan Eden, and they started an exile because of the sin that was committed there. And since there, the idea that you are expelled and forbidden to be in your own land is present several times during our history. When the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, we started a long period of exile of almost 2,000 years that we were not allowed to live freely in our land as a people. And then something very interesting started. On the one hand, we wanted to go on with our lives as Jews outside of Israel. So we have created mechanisms to continue with our Judaism outside of the Holy Land. So all of the Jewish rituals and institutions and structures that we know today were created as a way to allow ourselves to move on, to keep on practicing Judaism outside Israel. At the same time, mechanisms were created to keep on remembering that we were not in our land, that we were outside of Israel. So it is conflicting because we wanted to move on and to keep on living an authentic Jewish life outside Israel, but we didn't want to forget Israel. So we had to find a way at the same time to be very Jewish, but not to be too Jewish in the sense of feeling totally comfortable outside of Israel and maybe forgetting about Israel. And I want to give some examples of what I'm talking about that I think will help us to illustrate and to deepen a little bit our conversation. So what are those rituals and instruments that were given to us or created by our ancestors in order to allow Jewish life outside of Israel? There are many of them. The synagogues were a replacement for the temple. The institution of the rabbinate was a replacement for the priests, for the Kohanim, that had a very central role inside the temple. The sacrifices were replaced by the prayers, the tefillot. The whole idea of the reading of the Sefer Torah, you can take it wherever you are, and a shtibel, a very small place with 10 Jews, will be a continuation of the temple. And we keep on talking about Israel in our prayers. We keep on talking about Jerusalem in our daily prayers, and we keep on smashing a glass during marriages, during the wedding ceremony, in order to remember that we one day want to see Jerusalem rebuilt. We want to see the temple again. We want to go back to Israel, and Leshana Abba B'Yerushalayim, we will conclude our Sedarim by saying next year in Jerusalem, in a time that it was not an option. It was not a real option just to go to Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. So several ways were created by our tradition in order to keep the connection with Israel, and at the same time to practice Judaism outside Israel in a meaningful way, in a profound way. And then the first big change happened when the state of Israel was finally created. So to go to Israel was not a dream, an impossible dream, was an actual possibility. And many went. And then this discussion of either substituting the word exile by the word diaspora was much more appropriate, because we were not anymore exiled in the sense of we are forcibly prohibited to live in Israel, but it was a choice. So every Jew could decide whether to live outside or inside Israel, depending on his or her circumstances. So the word exile as a place that we cannot be, we are not allowed to be, started being substituted, replaced by the term diaspora, in the sense that we choose not to be there. But still, among other reasons to justify the state of Israel with all of its challenges, was the idea that this is the most secure, the safest place for the Jews to live, and the safest place for the Jews to be, which was challenged by the recent attacks. So the recent attacks showed that at least on October the 7th, it was very unsafe for a Jew to be in Israel. And the war that came after, and that actually still is going on, made it very dangerous and very challenging for Jews to visit Israel, to go to Israel, to live in Israel. It became a very dangerous situation that, God willing, will one day pass. But this conversation of the place of Israel in our faith, in our rituals, in our tradition, is a very old conversation that has received a new layer now, since the attacks and since the beginning of the war. So what we are going to do tonight, we will visit several sources, both traditional ones and contemporary ones, that will point in the direction of this tension between the idea of adjusting outside of Israel, but never to be totally adjusted because we are not in Israel, and somehow we are outside our real homeland. And there will be Jewish thinkers that will say, why so? I have mentioned here it before, when the Reform movement was first created in the 19th century, it was an anti-Zionist movement. The Reform movement was an anti-Zionist movement. Why? Because the Reform movement defended the integration of the Jews in the countries that they were living in. So the idea of dreaming of a Jewish country, of a Jewish land, was somehow perceived as a betrayal to their European citizenship, to their European identity. So if you keep on dreaming of a Jewish land, you will never be a real French or German, Austrian, and so on. So in the very beginning, the reform movement started as an anti-Zionist movement because saw a conflict, a contradiction there between being loyal to your country and at the same time dreaming of the foundation of a Jewish state. And today, still, we have anti-Zionist groups. The reform movement became a Zionist movement. The same thing with the conservative movement. But among both seculars and ultra-Orthodox Jews, there are anti-Zionists. There are people that defend then the very idea of a Jewish state is not good for the Jewish people, and it even risks somehow it makes us more vulnerable than just accepting that we are we will be always living in different countries around the world, and we can adapt and we can be part of the societies, and we can give our best and receive the best from the societies we live in. So this is the tension, and this is what I wanted to bring to you as an introduction. Maybe one more comment before we visit the sources. When we were expelled by the Romans from the Palestine, actually, that land received that name Palestine for the first time from the Romans. When we were expelled from Palestine and we had the temple destroyed, the Christians in their theology said that we were punished by God because we did not accept Jesus as the Messiah. So this is called the theology of the substitution. The theology of the substitution believes that the Jews were punished by God because the Jews did not accept Jesus as the Messiah, and this is the reason why the temple was destroyed and we were expelled from the Holy Land. After many, many, many years of anti-Semitism, the Catholic Church revisited this understanding during the Second Vatican Council. And by publishing the famous document Nostra Aetate, decided that this theology was not relevant and the Jews were not punished by not accepting Jesus, but the Jews should be respected and respected, and exchanges should be should happen with the Jews despite our differences. The Catholics were invited to see our differences as something that enrich our religions and not threatens it. But what is very interesting that not only the others saw the event of the destruction of the Second Temple and the expulsion from the Holy Land as a punishment, we ourselves interpreted the destruction of the temple and the expulsion as a punishment, not for not accepting Jesus as a Christ, but for being far away from God. So many of our own sources will describe the exile as a punishment from God, because we were not practicing Judaism, behaving ourselves the way God expected us to do. And many of our prophets, since the destruction from the first temple, and also after the destruction of the second temple, many of our sources will describe that moment as the result of a punishment. So the idea that the Jews live outside of Israel has a negative meaning connected to it. We can say it's wonderful that I live outside of Israel in a time that I actually can go to Israel and can live in Israel, but I decide to be outside. I have the freedom to choose. But during the time that it was not a choice, the idea that the Jews are not in the Holy Land was understood largely as a curse and a punishment, not only for non-Jews, but also by ourselves. So this is the general introduction. I am open now to hear your comments on the above before we go to the next group of sources.
I have one comment.
Yeah, please, Dora.
I had these thoughts during the second Intifada.
Intifada.
Intifada, it was around 2002 or so.
Right. I was in Israel from 2001 to 2005 during the second Intifada.
Were really bad then. It felt dangerous to travel there, and I think fewer people were going to visit, and it didn't feel like a safe place to be. And I never really thought of it that way. When I think of people who have moved to Israel or stayed in family that have stayed there, it was never to be safe there. It was to be there because it was just so special and so unique. And my feelings around then, I was thinking, why can't we just move Israel? Like, get out of that place. It will never be safe. Move all the people to a safe place. But when you go there, you see why that could never be, because it's just such a special place, and it's not because it's safe. It's because it's Israel. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dora. And it was really a very, very dangerous time during the Intifada. Just before we hear Miriam and Marty, I lived in Israel during the second Intifada, so I know very well what are you describing, what you are talking about. And I have an agreement with my family in Brazil that I will never go into a bus. I would not ride buses during this time because there were so many bombings in buses in Jerusalem that it was very dangerous. And I didn't want my family in Brazil to, every time they hear about a bombing, to think if I was there inside that bus or not. So it was really, really dangerous. And every place that many people were like together for any reason became a target, so it was dangerous to be with around a lot of people. It was more like safer to go to empty places than to go to places that were crowded for any reason. And every time I went to Brazil for any for vacations, because I was studying in Israel, and I went to Brazil during vacations, the Israelis would ask me, "How are you? Aren't you afraid of going to Brazil?" And and when I got to Brazil, people were asking me, "Aren't you afraid to live in Israel?" So this was the time that Brazilians couldn't understand how we were living in Israel, and Israelis couldn't understand how we were going to Brazil, because for different reasons, both places were considered to be dangerous. Actually, in Brazil, I was afraid to go to places with few people around, because then I was more exposed. And in Israel, I was afraid to go to places with many people around, because then I was exposed for a different reason, was a target for terrorists. So Miriam, you are on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. One of my very, very, very close religious friends moved to Israel 2 years ago. And when I speak to her every week. And one thing she says is, the way the world is now, I feel safer in Israel than I feel anywhere else.
Thank you, Miriam. And it's probably true also. Marty.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking of two things very quickly. When Louise and I came back from Petra, the first thing we said when we came back is, boy, are we glad to be home. You know, it's so good to be back in Israel. And then also, generally, like you were saying also, I think I walked around Israel nighttime, no concern. Don't think I would do it in Times Square. You know, so as you're saying, it just I never really felt a fear there.
Yes, at the same time as I was describing, there were times in Israel that it was really dangerous to be there. I had to walk during the Iraq war. I had to walk with mask and go to school carrying a mask, because they were afraid of chemical attacks, and you had to have this mask with you around. So there were moments like the one we are living now, that it was dangerous to live in Israel. And actually, there was not a moment that it was totally safe in Israel, unfortunately, because the threat of an attack from the several enemies around was always a reality. So there is the real threat, and there is also the perception about the threat, which not necessarily go along with each other. So yes, Roberta.
I think we can't overlook also the importance of having an Israel, even though it may not be the safest place, because, you know, it arose from the ashes of the Holocaust. And we may feel safe in this country, and Jews may or may not feel safe in Europe. But throughout Jewish history, there have been terrible things that have happened to Jews throughout the world. And to have an Israel that will accept us, you know, if the worst happens in any other country, I think is important. You may feel unsafe there, and you may be unsafe there, but you may be safer than a place like Germany in the 1930s. We're very lucky to have a place that, you know, is in existence for Jews in the darkest times.
Excellent, Roberta. And I think it's very, very important to remember the context in which Israel was created. It was really after the Holocaust, and the world is safer because Israel exists. And probably the Holocaust would never happen in a world with the state of Israel, or at least the Holocaust would not have been the same in a world with the existence of Israel. So yes, this is very, very important too, Roberta. Thank you. So let me share with you the next group of sources. So while the Jews were living outside of Israel, they had a lot of orientations and laws about how to relate to the non-Jewish environment around and how to distance themselves from idolatry, because this was a major concern of Judaism forever, how you can keep on being Jewish in a non-Jewish environment and not to be contaminated by the non-Jewish practices, in particular by idolatry. So just a few examples. This source from Mishnah Avodah Zarah, Rabbi Ishmael says, on the 3 days before the festivals of Gentiles and on the 3 days after them, it is prohibited to engage in business with those Gentiles, which makes the life of a Jew in a non-Jewish environment almost impossible. If you consider that every Sunday is a non-Jewish festival, is a holiday for the Christians. So, and you cannot do business with them 3 days before and 3 days after, so you cannot do business with them at all. And the idea was to distance the Jews from the non-Jewish environment, which made the Jews to be isolated, and many times not only because the non-Jews obligated the Jews to be isolated, but because the Jews just decided to be among themselves as a way to protect themselves and to protect their traditions. So the ghettos weren't places always that we were required to live in, but were places that we decided to live in because it made it easier to be among Jews. And there is a very interesting source. It's a little bit longer, but I think it's very interesting, and I want to read. Maybe another volunteer that could read this one for us from Mishnah Avodah Zarah. Do we have a reader? Yes, Roberta, thank you so much. I will probably interrupt you sometimes because I need to explain things. Yes.
A wise Gentile, Proclus ben Prospus, once asked a question of Rabban Gamliel in the city of Acca when he was bathing in the bathhouse of the Greek god Aphrodite.
Okay, so just a moment. So we have here two people, a wise Gentile. Okay, so we see already that Mishnah is saying that this wasn't a regular Gentile, it was a wise Gentile that asked a question of Rabban Gamliel, that was a very, very important rabbi at his time, in the city of Acco, when he was bathing in the bathhouse of the Greek god Aphrodite. So he was in a place of idolatry. Okay. Yes.
Proclus said to him, "It is written in your Torah, and nothing of the proscribed items shall cleave to your hand." Deuteronomy 13:18. For what reason do you bathe before an idol in the bathhouse of Aphrodite?
So this Gentile comes to Rabban Gamliel and says, "What are you doing here? How can you be bathing here in front of an idol? Because the bathhouse of the Greek god Aphrodite has a big statue of Aphrodite there, and it would eventually make it a forbidden place for Rabban Gamliel. Why was he there? And the response is very fascinating. Yes.
Rabban Gabriel said to him, one may not answer questions related to Torah in the bathhouse.
Okay, so he says to the Gentile, I cannot answer your question because we are in front of Aphrodite. I can be here, but I cannot talk about Torah in here. I cannot discuss Judaism in front of the statue. I can be in front of the statue, but I cannot talk about. So here is an interesting question, whether Rabban Gamliel really thought that he can be there, but cannot study Torah, or he wanted to gain some time and to think about the question before responding it. Yes, let's continue.
And when he left the bathhouse, Rabban Gamliel gave him several answers. He said to him, I did not come into its domain. It came into my domain. The bathhouse existed before the statue dedicated to Aphrodite was erected.
Okay, so the bathhouse was there before, and then they dedicated the statue, which makes it allowed for me to come here and to use the bathhouse. So if it was the opposite, the statue was there before, and then they built the bathhouse around the statue, it would not be okay for me to be there. This is the first response. Let's listen to the others.
Furthermore, people do not say, let us make a bathhouse as an adornment for Aphrodite. Rather, they say, let us make a statue of Aphrodite as an adornment for the bathhouse. Therefore, the main structure is not the Aphrodite statue, but the bathhouse.
Okay, so Aphrodite here is a detail. It's not the. I'm not going to a temple in which the statue is the most important thing there. I'm going to a bathhouse that happens to have an Aphrodite statue. It's not the principle. It's not the main thing there. This is another answer.
Rabban Gamliel continued, alternatively, there is another answer. Even if people would give you a lot of money, you would not enter before your object of idol worship naked, or as one who experienced a seminal emission who comes to the bathhouse to purify himself, nor would you urinate before it. This statue stands upon the sewage pipe, and all the people urinate before it. There is no prohibition in this case, as it is stated in the verse only, their gods, see Deuteronomy 12:2, which indicates that a statue that people treat as a deity is forbidden, but one that people do not treat with respect that is due to a deity is permitted.
Okay, so as the statue of Aphrodite is not treated as a god in that place, because people just go around naked, it's a bathhouse, then it's not a god. It would be a god only if people would treat the Aphrodite statue as a god, as people despise it and do not pay attention and go naked around and so on. So it's not a god for them. So it's also not a god for us, in the sense that we are not forbidden to be there. This is the answer. What I find very interesting about this source is that the Jews were struggling with the idea of living among non-Jews and trying to find every kind of excuse, and sometimes not only excuse, explanations for just going on with their lives in this environment. I would compare to nowadays to someone who keeps kosher and goes to a non-kosher restaurant. And there are many ways for you to justify to be in a non-kosher restaurant. And there are things that you can have actually in a non-kosher place that are easier to in an halachic standpoint to have than other things. So there is a negotiation. This is the word. I think there is a negotiation when the Jews are living in a place that is not Jewish. And they are constantly interacting with this non-Jewish environment. There is always a negotiation going on. The Jews are saying, okay, I can go to here, but I cannot go there. I can eat this, but I cannot eat that. It's different from the moment in which the Jews were just among themselves in the ghetto, in the shtetl, or in Israel. But they are not. They are among the non-Jews, the Gentiles, and they need to negotiate and to have this conversation that I think is more symbolic than anything else. But it happens all the time. Let's go a little bit further and find some more modern sources. So who would able to read Theodor Herzl for us? Marty, I think you would like to read Theodor Herzl. I am introducing.
Okay. Solution of the Jewish question. This was in 1896 with Theodor Herzl. I am introducing no new idea. On the contrary, is a very old one. It is a universal idea, and therein lies its power, old as the people, which never, even in time of the bitterest calamities, cease to cherish it. This is the restoration of the Jewish state. It is remarkable that we Jews should have dreamt this kingly dream all through the long night of our history. Now day is dawning. We need only rub the sleep out of our eyes, stretch our limbs, and convert the dream into reality, into a reality.
Okay, so the idea of the Jewish state, according to Herzl, is something that never left the Jews. It was always there. It was always present. We are just going back to the place that we, in our minds, have never left.
Rabbi?
Yes.
You know, that's very interesting, because I always wondered why anybody would say the reason for Israel was the Holocaust. It's not. I mean, Zionism went so far back, and it's been forever. I mean, it's not. I agree with what was said before. If we probably had an Israel, maybe the Holocaust would not have been exactly what it was. But that, to say that the only, and some people I think do say that, the main reason that Israel exists is only because of the Holocaust.
No, only because I think it's an exaggeration, but the Holocaust played an important role.
Yeah,
there.
because of the time.
Sure, it brought awareness
To the
world.
But they still forgot about it now.
Yeah.
It hasn't.
Aleph Dalet Gordon. Who would like to read Gordon for us? Don't be
I'll
shy.
read it, Rabbi.
Thank you, Miriam.
A.D. Gordon, 1856 to 1922. We are a parasitic people. We have no roots in soil. There is no ground beneath our feet. We are parasites, not only in an economic sense, but in spirit, in thought, in poetry, in literature, and in our virtues, our ideals, our higher human aspirations. Every alien movement sweeps us along. Every wind in the world carries us. We in ourselves are almost non-existent. So of course, there are nothing in the eyes of other people. We are nothing in the eyes of other people. Wow.
So while we are not in Israel, while we are not in our land, we have no existence. We will never be respected because we are barely respecting ourselves outside of Israel. We are parasites, according to Aleph Dalet Gordon. Let's read now Golda Meir, and this one I think is good for Barbara Kaplan.
Thank you. We have nothing against Jews in the Galut. It is against the Galut itself that we protest.
Galut is the word for diaspora.
Okay. We have always believed, and I personally have thought, that the foundation of Zionism is more than geographical independence. I have always believed that Zionism means Jewish emancipation in every sense, including the spiritual and cultural, so that a Jew who creates cultural values may do so as a free man. It may be assuming on my part, but I believe that there is no Jew in the Galut creating as a free man and as a free Jew. Only a Jew in Israel can do so. If a Jew lives in Israel and creates as a free Jew and as a free man, writes about various problems in the world, about Jewish life and non-Jewish life, about science, art, and literature, his writing will not be less universal than that of a Jew who lives in the Galut, in every Galut, even in the best of them, for there he must, willingly and unwillingly, consciously or unconsciously, adapt himself to his surroundings. Then he is not a free man.
Wow, this is very strong. So Golda Meir is saying when we live outside of Israel, we are always adapting to something, and we are never ourselves.
Good.
We are not free outside of Israel because we are adjusting ourselves to the environment, to the Aphrodite bathhouse. We are justifying why we can be there all the time because we are outside of the land in which we can be really free. We can be really free only in Israel. This is what Golda Meir sustains. It's very strong. Aleph Bet Yoshua, who will be able to get this one?
Zionism emerged at the end of the last century, not from renewal longings for Eretz Israel, nor from sudden abhorrence of exile. The Jews always hated the Golah and longed with all their soul to Eretz Israel. But the hatred of exile and the longing for Eretz Israel did not budge the Jews. Zionism began with the fear of the Golah. Now dangerous and terrible, this existence could be suddenly became clear to the Jews, and among a few, the fear of the Golah overcame the fear of Eretz Israel.
So there was fear of the diaspora and fear of Israel. And when the fear of the diaspora, of the Golah, overcame the fear of Israel, then it was the time to found the state of Israel. Stuart, do you want to go to the next one? Exile Abstract.
Jacob Klotzkin wants to find the real issues of the debate in terms of two questions: whether the diaspora can in fact survive and whether it deserves to survive. Present-day defenders of the diaspora as an adequate base for Jewish living tend to invert the questions. They ask, is Israel today guaranteed to survive, or is life in Israel today an adequate base for truly Jewish living? These may be stimulating or even significant questions about Israel, but if one is discussing the prospects and quality of diaspora life today, it is irrelevant and evasive to take refuge in an attack on the prospects and quality of Jewish life in contemporary Israel.
So this discussion goes in the opposite direction than the ones that we saw before. Is Israel today guaranteed to survive? Hopefully, yes, but there are moments that we are really afraid. Yes, Marty.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know a few people in Israel, especially in Arad when we were there teaching, and some of them would express that it's the most important thing to them as being Jewish is that they live in Israel and they don't observe. They're not Shabbos, though they light candles, they do the traditions on Friday night. These are a few people I can think of. But, they're not like, let's say, a lot of the young Israel people are, or, they're not deeply, if that's a way of putting it, religious.
So what you are saying is very, very important and right to the point, Marty.
Yeah.
So living in Israel is not necessarily a guarantee of continuation of Judaism.
Some of those people think it is, though.
So this is a very, very fascinating question.
I had conversations.
Because one could defend that the creation of the modern state of Israel made continuation of ritual Judaism weaker.
They look at it as
It diminished ritual Judaism. So in that sense, the creation of the state of Israel is a threat to traditional ritual religious Judaism, because most of the Israelis are secular Jews.
And it's history. Everything's history.
There are more secular Jews in Israel than in any other country. And those Jews feel that by the fact that they speak Hebrew and they go to the army, they are Jewish. They are practicing Judaism by living in Israel and speaking Hebrew and going to the army. They don't necessarily practice ritual Judaism or religious Judaism. Not all of them, but many of them. So it could be defended as Israel as a threat and not by chance. Ultra Orthodox Jews do not accept Israel because they say Israel will be legitimate only when it will be an halachic state of Israel, and when it will be ruled by the laws of the Torah, by the Talmud. Only when Israel becomes a religious state, in an Orthodox sense of religiosity, it will be a legitimate state of the Jews. Wow, it's fascinating.
It's crazy.
Yes, we can say that the protection of the body of the Jewish people does not go necessarily with the protection of the soul of the Jewish people. And some will say, is Israel protecting the body and the soul of the Jewish people? Or maybe protecting the body and threatening the soul, and at times not even protecting the body. And Just to be clear, I am a Zionist, okay? I'm bringing the conversation because I think it's fascinating. We have one last source, but I think it's a very, very beautiful one. Who would like to read this last one, this very last one? Thank you, Miriam. Thank you so much.
Okay, the necessity of exile tablet magazine. Ironically, in the debates about the negotiation of the diaspora,
The negation.
I'm sorry, the negation of the diaspora, both sides, Zionists and anti-Zionists, have shared a premise. Exile as defining category of Jewish existence was over. Zionists.
So just to stop here for a moment because it's important. In the debates of the negation of the diaspora, both sides, Zionist and anti-Zionist, have shared the idea that exile as a defining category of Jewish existence was over, that we cannot talk anymore about exile. Let's understand why.
Zionists and diasporists both rejected in some fashion the notion that exile remained an operative category of Jewish existence. The Zionists mostly believe exile had ended and thus immigration to the land was necessary. Diasporists believe exile had ended and now Jews in the diaspora could live in a safe state of dispersion, Gola, and not Galut, exile.
Okay, so just a moment before we jump to the last paragraph, just to make it clear. So for different reasons, Zionists and anti-Zionists will agree here that we cannot talk about exile anymore. We don't talk about exile anymore because according to Zionists, there is no more exile because you can just come to Israel and live in Israel. And according to the anti-Zionists, there is no more exile because you can stay in the diaspora for an option, as a decision, by choosing and not by obligation. So the idea that the Jews live in the diaspora because they want to makes the whole notion of exile non-existent. And the idea that the Jews can go to Israel and live in Israel also make the idea of exile inexistent. So for both of them, the idea of exile is over. Let's see the last paragraph.
The diasporists envisioned the end of exile as the end of oppression in the diaspora, a fact that may include the existence of a sovereign Jewish state, while Zionists envisioned the end of exile as the end of diaspora, leaving only the Jewish state.
Marty, isn't it clear?
Yes. Yeah.
So they get to the same place. Both of them will agree that we cannot talk about exile anymore, but we talk about a diaspora that is a choice and not a lack of choice. Let me stop sharing for our last comments. Does someone would like to bring any final thought before we conclude?
Yeah, I love in the first paragraph where it said the argument is that the statue came to me. I was here before the statue. And I feel that way. I feel the Jews were there. They were there. It's their land. And, and I just feel we were there. It's ours. Leave us alone already.
But hear the tension there, Miriam. We are there, but we are not.
I know.
We were there, but we are not. And
Yes, it's very
we
painful.
choose not to be.
Well, it's complicated.
So the idea of the meeting tonight was not to solve any question, but just to appreciate the conflict that are present in Zionism, and that there was always there. This tension was always there. And now the recent attacks and the war that we are with sadness, we are witnessing is another layer in this complex and profound conversation about the relationship between a people and a land.
Rabbi, very quick thing. I'm just wondering if you would know. It seems that a lot of people that made Aliyah from the United States, at least that the people I'm thinking of, quite a few, they're more, in many ways, they're more religious in the way maybe we are in the diaspora than some of the people that I actually met in Israel that I expressed before. You know, you had both, you know. And it's strange if they ever do go to a service, they go to an Orthodox service for high holidays. Just interesting.
You mean the Israelis or the ones who
This
made?
was a few of the Israelis that would observe Shabbat, don't work on, you know, all that kind of kosher, but that they don't observe a lot of the other, a lot of things, a ritual. I don't think they put on tefillin. I'm thinking of just some people, not every, but they'll, if they go to a service on high holidays, they'll go to an Orthodox service. Now, I'm just talking about a group of people that.
Yeah, there is this say that the Orthodox synagogue is the legitimate one that the Israeli will never go to, but the only one that the Israeli recognize as legitimate. The Reform and the conservative movement, for different reasons, came late to the story of the state of Israel, and could not yet find a big place there. A large impact is yet to be seen of the liberal movements in the state of Israel, in part because we have this monopoly of the rabbinate that is the only one allowed to officiate marriages and funerals and things like that. They get their salary paid by the state, and the liberal rabbis do not get, and things like that. But for different reasons, yes. Most of the population is secular, also because they do not know any alternative to Orthodox Judaism. They think that it's everything or nothing issue. And if they could get in touch with the more liberal, progressive options, maybe some of the secular Israelis would not be so secular. Some of them come to Camp Ramah to work here in the U.S., and they go back to Israel, and they connect themselves to a conservative synagogue, to a Reform synagogue, because they had a meaningful experience here in the U.S. with non-Orthodox Judaism. But this is a very, very small number. The vast majority of the Israeli population have no relation, no contact with progressive streams, progressive movements. Yes, Barbara.
Yes, I just want to say that the Women's League, each region has a connection with a kahila in Israel. And the Brooklyn Queens Long Island region was just twinned with Kehilat Mayonot in Jerusalem. And we hope to develop a really good connection. We just, in our newsletter last week, we just had our first article. We're hoping that many of our sisterhoods and synagogues in our area will have group meetings. And of course, because of the time difference, the best time to do would be on a Sunday. But, there are more and more of these Kehilat. And this one has about 100 families. So it's very interesting. And I'll just, so maybe we could even do something with them. But I already spoke to the person on the board, and we're hoping to do more in our region. And this is many other this is throughout Women's League, because it's important to have this connection.
This is very, very important to strengthen those kehilot. There are not so many of them in Israel, and the majority of them struggles to survive. I have colleagues that work in 2 or 3 different kehilot in order to make one full-time salary, because the kehilot just cannot afford paying a full-time rabbi, and there are less than 100 kehilot. When you put together the reform and the conservative movement, you will not get more than 100 kehilot, which for Israel is not a lot. In Jerusalem, you have 100 Orthodox synagogues in one single neighborhood. So it's a struggle, and hopefully we will find our way to be more impactful to the Israeli society. Yes. Thank you so much, everyone. Any final words, Keith?
Yeah, can I just, can I say something? Can you hear me?
Sure, we can.
Oh, you can hear. I just said that it's an interesting feeling I got from this conversation, feeling that I want Israel. It's like my home. It's my country. And I have a choice to be everywhere. People, if they're Spanish or French or Russian, they also go in other countries, but they have a country. They belong, like children who leave the home. They want to have a home. They don't want their parents' home destroyed. You want to know that you belong somewhere. You have a place. The whole world today is a mishmash all over. The European Union, kids go all over from another country, but they have their Luxembourg, or they have Bulgaria, or where they have their country. Everybody, so we have to have that country is ours. We could be wherever we want. I mean, it happens. We were born all over the place. And it's a good feeling, and it's very important for it to be there. So people could say, well, you're nobody, you don't belong, you don't have a home. We do have a country. And I think that's what sort of crystallized in this conversation.
This is very beautiful, as a home in the sense of a reference. Yeah.
Right. This whole country, the United States, is people in diaspora from somewhere else.
Right. Even from Brazil.
Right.
Great. Thank you so much.
Good
Have
night.
a wonderful night.
Good
You
night.
too. Good night.
Bye.